Hello, welcome to episode 3 of my review season 3 of Man in High Castle. Today we're going to ponder the question, can you be innocent and still do bad things? Episode 3 of Season 3 of Man in the High Castle. The episode title is Senso Koi. And the meaning of Senso Koi is, if I'm correct, war and love. So the title hints that there is going to be a duality explored in the episode. People doing dark things and also trying to follow their light impulses. Something we'll see particularly in the character played by Luke Kleintank, Joe Blake. Before we get into discussion of the episode, let's read a quick description of the plot. This comes from the show's website on Amazon. Season 3, Episode 3. Juliana and Tagomi pursue the mysteries of the films, and Juliana reunites with an old friend. Children is anxious to return to San Francisco now that the reprisals have stopped, but a potential new romance makes Ed reluctant to leave. Kido receives information that sets him on a new path. Smith finds himself celebrated by Nazi high society at a screening of Nicole's new film about Thomas. And that's the general plot of the episode. Other credits. The director of this episode is Ernst Dickerson. He has been directing television episodes for many years. Among his credits are The Wire and Treme, but he's also known for being the cinematographer for Spike Lee during the early part of Spike Lee's career. So he was a cinematographer on She's Gotta Have It, Do the Right Thing, School Days, a lot of the early films, I think all the way up to Malcolm X. The writer was Chris Collins. Also, he's worked on The Wire and Sons of Anarchy. And both of these guys, Ernst Dickerson and Chris Collins, they've worked with Eric Overmyer from The Wire and Treme. So here, again, getting back to the theme, what influence does the showrunner have on the show? We can see that a lot of the creatives, a lot of the talent behind the camera, Eric Overmyer has had an influence on who is working on the show within season 3. Next, let's talk about the acting. I'm going to sing the praises of Laura Manel, the actress who plays Thelma Harris, the compromised or corrupt journalist, however you want to put it. She had a really remarkable scene with Nicole Dormer, who plays Bella Heathcote, the Nazi propaganda filmmaker. And one thing I want to remark upon in the scene is the cinematography. So I have two images of the scene the two of them have in a restaurant. Let's see if I can get this lined up. Here's scene 1. And notice the framing, how the two women are on, let's see, my right of the frame, and on the left is a candle. And normally in a two-shot like that, you want to line the actors up so that one's on the left and one is on the right, because the eye is going to go where the space is, and there's a lot of space over here with the candle. So I thought that was really interesting shot. I'm not sure what the decision was behind that. Maybe the space was a little bit smaller than they had the room for the camera, so they had to get creative about how they framed it. But they continued that in another shot right here with Nicole Dormer. And notice again all the white space. You see her on the right of your screen. On the left, there's all that the background, the white background, and I think you can even see someone. They're in a restaurant. You can see someone in the back here. When she plays this scene, she kind of fills in the frame in the middle, but you can see she kind of fills in the frame in the middle as she moves around. But you can see that for the most part, the shot was framed with all the white space over here and the two actresses over here. So it was kind of an interesting way of minimizing them in the screen. And one reason why not just the cinematography of that scene, but also the acting really struck me was that it ties into the theme later that I want to discuss later of private life and public identity, and how under the two different regimes, the two different totalitarian regimes, they're both imperiled, but in they're different degrees. But that your private life, when you live in a free society, is your own, and maybe to a larger degree to your public life. But in a totalitarian society, even not just your private life, meaning the life within your own home, but then your thoughts also become subjected to control by the state. We see that with the character of Joe Blake when he undergoes the reprogramming. It's not just enough for him to swear allegiance to the Reich, but he also has to think the correct thoughts. And that's the purpose of re-education. And you see that in his conflict, which leads me into the second scene I want to point out, which was between the characters of Juliana Crane and Joe Blake, and the actresses Alexa Davalos and Luca Kleintank. And I have that scene loaded up on the Kindle. And because I'm not familiar with how much I can play of a scene before getting into like copyright issues, let me just show. That's the two of them.
Thought you'd be there. What happened? Why did you go to Berlin?
My father.
That's the basics of the scene.
Me too.
Again, I'm not sure, because it's review. I should be free to show clips from the TV show, but in my research on the internet, it seems that technically, yes, if you're doing it for purposes of review or criticism, you can use material from the thing you're criticizing or reviewing, but they can still hassle you. They can claim copyright strike on the YouTube channel, and if you're connected with a YouTube channel, then it's easier for the company or the organization you're with to mediate with the production company for the product that you're reviewing. But if you're just a freelancer like me, they can place a copyright strike on you and it becomes a big hassle. So I'm not sure. I should be able to show more than that, but I'll stop there. However, I did write down the dialogue that I thought was really important to understanding this theme about partly public identity and personal identity in the conflict between the two. So I will say the character that's saying the line and then read the line. Juliana, I know that I watched you walk into that room in the uniform, though. This is after they've met at the trade ministers meeting or conference. I can't remember technically what the meeting was. They've seen each other already once, and they're both aware that they're operating on some sort of pretense. But she sees him in the Nazi uniform, and she no longer trusts her instincts about him. So after he comes to her in her apartment, she lays that on him. She tells him that this is her concern. Okay, so I'll repeat that. I know that I've watched you walk into that room in uniform, though, embodying everything that I fucking feared. And then Joe says, I had no choice. It's just a fucking job. It doesn't define who I am. And then later, Joe says, the future is the Reich. The Reich is the future. Juliana, we can be on the right side of history. And so again, Joe had gone through, he had always been kind of an ambiguous figure. You never really knew where his allegiances were. He seemed to have good instincts. Like, I'm trying to think of any decisions he made where he sacrificed his own well-being. Well, he's done it. He sacrificed his own well-being for Juliana when he saved her life and then life for her in season 1. So that showed where he was acting not out of purely selfish interests. But he's always also been capable of acting in a way that was beneficial just for himself. So you never really knew. Like many of the characters, that their morality is called into question. It ties into what effect living in an oppressive society has on our freedom and on our ability to have empathy and make decisions that are beneficial for others, not just for ourselves. I've read a book as part of research for, I've been reading a few things as part of research for reviewing this show. For example, right now I'm in the middle of reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. But I also read a book, The Man in the High Castle and Philosophy, and one of the writers, Verna Erdberger, in a chapter called What If Evil Had Won, pointed out some comments that the philosopher and historian Hannah Arendt had made regarding the trial of Adolf Eichmann. And Hannah Arendt wrote about Adolf Eichmann. To recall, during the Nuremberg trials, many of the Nazis tried to claim innocence by saying, I was only following orders. It wasn't my decision to execute the Jews or to kill this resistance, this member of the resistance. I was only following orders. And Hannah Arendt had serious issues with that. And that argument didn't help the Germans under trial at Nuremberg. But Hannah Arendt's concern is not just where do we draw the distinction between innocence and guilt. She had a philosophical concern about where do we compromise ourselves? At what point do we become guilty regardless of do we believe we are innocent? And Hannah Arendt wrote, quote, Eichmann, his guilt came from obedience, and obedience is praised as virtue, meaning in a totalitarian society, an evil society, doing the wrong thing gets praised as the right thing. And then she went on to write, in a world where everybody, this is not Hannah Arendt, this is Verna Arnberger. In a world where everybody is doing the wrong thing, doing the right thing suddenly seems wrong. And so Joe Blake, whose motivations were always questionable, it seemed like he himself didn't quite know what he wanted to do. He was a little bit lost. Verna Ernberger is pointing out that Joe is compromised. He says, the future is the Reich is the future. We can be on the right side of history. So Joe is another one of those people who are turning a blind eye. And by turning a blind eye, they become guilty. Even if they are only passively part of oppression, they are the oppressors. And quote, as Arendt realized, the problem doesn't lie in the fact that these people are evil, but that they choose to look the other way. That's Verna Ernberger. So I think we will probably, this issue of innocence, of how innocent can you be in a corrupt society, and we see it again and again with the actions of Joe Smith. And I think that my guess is it will be a recurring theme in further episodes. This conflict between Joe Blake and Juliana, this is just the beginning. This may in fact be the beginning of a future conflict between them, because we're seeing now they are not at all working for the same goal. Joe has become compromised. He's part of the evil. And Juliana, everything she's doing, that her sister sacrificed for, is to not be part of that, is to create a place where people are free. I wanted to comment upon the idea of the public self and the private self. And give me 1 second, I need to get a drink of water. But in this season, this idea is becomes sharply drawn by the writers. We see that in the characters of Thelma and Nicole. In a way, both of them are living a lie, because their sexual identity is a masquerade. In Nazi Germany and in Japan, to a lesser extent, being homosexual is a death sentence. So both of them are forced to hide who they truly are. And in the case of Thelma, she has a sham marriage. Her husband is gay and she is gay. And in the case of Nicole, we are only learning now that she has at least a fluid sexual identity, because she's had encounters with Luke. So she may be bisexual, but regardless of that, anything outside the norm in Nazi Germany is subject to extermination. So in order to maintain their status and power, they have to lie. And you see that when Thelma goes to the big reception, she brings her husband. And when Nicole goes to the reception, she brings her companion from work. This contrasts with the attitude the Japanese apparently take towards homosexuality in the West, the occupied West. In this episode, the characters of Ed and Robert Children have a conversation, and Children wants to return to San Francisco. Ed wants to stay in the neutral zone with the new person, the new partner that he's met. And the reason Ed wants to stay is that he says the pawns don't care about what you do in your own home. So the writers seem to be drawing a difference between how the Germans view the public self and the private self, and how the Japanese view it. In the writers' view, it seems like that the Germans are diminishing the difference between personal self and private self, that there is very little distinction between the two. And we see that a lot in tension in the home of Joe Smith, with the conflict he had with Thomas, that his son was ill and it wasn't going to be just a personal matter for the family. By becoming ill, he became, in the German state's view, a drag on the state. So he would have to have been exterminated or killed. Whereas Ed seems to be saying that to the Japanese, they don't care. If you do it in public, it's a matter for them, but if you do it in private, they don't care. My criticism of that is that, for me, I think that the Japanese would be concerned with... Well, let me draw a distinction here. The Japanese would, if you were to claim the Japanese would not be as concerned about what happens in private, my rejoinder would be that to Japanese culture, there is less of a distinction between the private self and the personal self, that between the private self and the public self. That in Japanese culture, the private self is the public self. Whereas in German culture or Western culture, there is a stronger distinction between what we expect, the freedoms that we expect to have in our home and in our free time, and our obligation to our work and to our family and other organizations that are bigger than us. That to the Japanese, the personal self only exists in the way that they can contribute to the public self. So that if you were to claim the Japanese care less about what goes on behind closed doors, I would argue that's only because there's less of an expectation that what goes on behind closed doors belongs to the individual. And I don't see that kind of sharp distinction being drawn within the show. to my mind, it just seems to the show. It seems to me that the show wants to portray the Germans and the totalitarianism of the Germans as breaking down the boundary between the individual, like we see in Luke Kleintink's character, Joe Blake, and the way that he was re-educated, and that the Japanese are more laissez-faire behind closed doors. And I think at that point we're just dealing with an alternative Earth, that we're no longer trying to closely mirror the two cultures, but we've just created an alternative Earth. And at that point we can talk about how are the two different, but they're no longer as close as they could be. That's all I have for now. And my expectation is that I see that a lot of the conflicts they've set up now, they should begin to become developed more, and some of the situations are just beginning to establish, like between Thelma and Nicole. Those will be, the conflict will be drawn. Like at this point we don't see danger between those two working together, but I imagine that now the writers will begin to raise the stakes, turn up the heat on those characters. All right, that's all for now. I hope to see you soon. Take care and be well.